Imagine being a successful CEO, a black man who has fought every obstacle to reach the pinnacle of his career only to be humiliated in the most basic way. Stripped of his rightful first-class seat on a packed flight, forced into a cramped economy seat, all because of the color of his skin. How does someone with power, wealth, and influence confront such raw, everyday racism? What does it take to turn a personal injustice into a movement that shakes an entire industry? This is the story of Malik Bennett, a brilliant entrepreneur whose quiet dignity is tested at 30,000 feet. Surrounded by whispers, suspicion, and outright bias, Malik chooses not silence, but courage, recording every moment, finding unexpected allies, and igniting a wave of accountability that will reach far beyond a single flight. What price will Malik pay for standing up, and can true change be born from moments of deep injustice? Join us as we dive deep into this emotional, gripping journey of resilience, justice, and hope. If you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of their skin color, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of people standing against discrimination. Let's begin. The early morning light filtered softly through the large windows of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The usual hum of activity was just beginning to stir as travelers shuffled through terminals, dragging luggage behind them, some sipping hurried coffee, others absorbed in their phones. Amidst this sea of faces, one man stood out not just because of his impeccable tailoring, but because of the quiet confidence he carried like a second skin. Malik Bennett adjusted the lapel of his charcoal gray suit as he approached Gate B-17. His black leather briefcase swung lightly at his side, perfectly balanced with the rhythm of his purposeful steps. At 45 years old, Malik was the CEO of Vanguard Biotech, a company on the cutting edge of medical innovation. He had traveled all over the world, speaking at conferences, meeting investors, and breaking barriers for black entrepreneurs in a predominantly white industry. Today's flight was no different on the surface. He was bound for Los Angeles International Airport, where a pivotal meeting awaited him. Malik's latest breakthrough in gene therapy had attracted serious attention. If this deal went through, it would not only catapult his company's growth, but could change thousands of lives. His mind flickered to the dossier he had meticulously reviewed just moments ago in his hotel room. Double-checking every slide for the upcoming investor presentation, he glanced around the bustling gate area as families said their goodbyes. Business travelers typed on laptops, and the airline staff prepared for boarding. Malik's heart beat steady, but with that familiar tingle of anticipation, the weight of responsibility that came with leadership. When the boarding announcement came, Malik slipped his phone into his pocket and moved forward with the crowd of first-class passengers. He was used to this routine. Years of frequent flying had made him efficient, calm, and observant. Yet, beneath the surface, an ever-present awareness lingered, a caution honed by countless subtle reminders that his skin color often invited assumptions and prejudice, even in the most polished settings. As he approached the scanner, his boarding pass lit up the screen in crisp letters. Seat 1A, window seat, first class, enjoy your flight. Mr. Bennett, the gate agent said with a polite smile, barely glancing at him before motioning to the next passenger. Malik nodded and stepped onto the jet bridge, the familiar scent of jet fuel and cabin air welcoming him. The hum of engines filled the air as he made his way to the front of the aircraft. His eyes scanned the cabin, catching glimpses of the plush leather seats, gleaming wood accents, and the subtle glow of overhead reading lights. The flight attendants were already greeting passengers with practiced smiles. When one of them caught sight of Malik, Her expression flickered for a brief second, a momentary hesitation that Malik had grown used to, but she recovered quickly and offered a polite nod. He settled into his seat with practiced ease, stowing his briefcase in the overhead bin and pulling out his tablet. As he powered it on, his mind shifted back to the deal ahead. Everything was in place. This was supposed to be a smooth flight, a moment to collect his thoughts before the storm of questions and negotiations. But then, just as the cabin doors closed and the seatbelt sign blinked on, something happened that Malik hadn't anticipated. A shadow fell over his tablet. Malik looked up to see a tall, well-dressed man standing in the aisle. His gaze was sharp, his stance assertive. This was Ethan Caldwell, a white businessman Malik had noticed during boarding someone who seemed entitled to every luxury the flight could offer. "Excuse me, sir," Ethan said, voice clipped. "You're in my seat." Malik's eyes flicked to his own boarding pass. "Seat 1A. "I believe this is my assigned seat," Malik replied evenly, holding up his boarding pass for Ethan to see. Ethan smirked, not backing down. "No, this is my seat. I've had it reserved for months. You must have been given the wrong boarding pass." The cabin grew silent. Passengers turned their heads. Flight attendants nearby exchanged quick glances. Malik felt the familiar knot tighten in his stomach. The weight of the moment pressed down, heavy and oppressive. This wasn't about a seat. It was about something far deeper. His mind raced as he searched for the right words, the right response. The calm exterior he wore like armor threatened to crack under the pressure. Inside, a quiet battle waged between pride and pragmatism, between anger and reason. He knew what would happen if he pushed too hard. He had been twice as good, twice as patient, only to be met with doubt and suspicion. He could feel it now, the invisible line drawn sharply around him by the assumptions of others. Malik's voice stayed steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I boarded with a valid boarding pass. I'm asking that the crew verify this before asking me to move." A flight attendant, Olivia Clark, approached, her smile tight, eyes flickering with impatience. "Sir, there seems to be a mix-up," she said coolly, directing her attention more to Ethan than Malik. "Please come with me while we sort this out." Malik hesitated, weighing his options. The murmurs grew louder. Some passengers looked uncomfortable. Others stared with judgment. Malik sat back, the luxurious leather seat suddenly feeling less like a throne and more like a spotlight. His thoughts turned inward. Is this really happening? Is this what it means to be black in America? To be doubted, displaced, questioned, even when you're undeniably in the right? The boarding pass in his hand was more than paper. It was a symbol of his hard-won place. And yet, here he was, being asked to surrender it. Outside the polished windows, the plane waited, engines humming with quiet impatience. Malik knew this was just the beginning. The seat that was meant to be his sanctuary had become a battleground, and how he chose to respond would change everything. Malik Bennett sat quietly by the large window of his penthouse apartment, overlooking downtown Seattle. The city was waking slowly beneath a pale dawn sky. The first hints of sunlight caught the glass towers, reflecting like scattered diamonds. Outside, the usual sounds of the early morning distant traffic, birds, and the soft hum of life beginning mixed with the calm inside the room. Malik's hands rested lightly on the sleek surface of the mahogany desk, his mind far away from the skyline and the peaceful moment. He was preparing for a journey not just of miles, but of immense significance. The meeting in Los Angeles was more than a business trip. It was a step forward in a lifetime of struggle and ambition. He thought back to his childhood in Chicago's South Side, a neighborhood that had shaped him with both hardship and hope. It was a place where resilience was learned early and where dreams often felt distant, but never impossible. Malik's parents had been his earliest teachers. His mother, a school teacher, had instilled in him a love of knowledge and a fierce pride in his heritage. His father, a bus driver with an unyielding work ethic, had always said, "Son, you have to be twice as good and half as loud." Those words echoed through Malik's life, a mantra that had guided him through countless challenges. It was not just about proving others wrong, but about proving to himself that he was worthy and capable. Education became his sanctuary. Scholarships took him away from the noise of the city to Harvard University, where he excelled quietly but resolutely. There, he found mentors who nurtured his talents in a community that both challenged and uplifted him. But even in those hallowed halls, Malik was painfully aware of how different he was from many of his peers. The implicit bias, the subtle exclusion, and the constant pressure to perform at extraordinary levels were relentless. After graduating, Malik returned to the world with a burning desire to create something meaningful. Vanguard Biotech began as a modest startup in a cramped lab, with only a handful of dedicated scientists and a vision to revolutionize gene therapy. The path was steep, littered with setbacks, skepticism, and the ever-present shadow of racial bias. Investors often questioned his credentials more than his ideas. Doors sometimes closed without explanation. Yet Malik persisted, driven by the knowledge that what he was working on could change lives. His technology offered hope to patients suffering from rare genetic diseases, people whose stories haunted him and fueled his determination. Every late night, every sacrifice, was made with them in mind. Now, on the eve of a crucial investment meeting, Malik was acutely aware of the stakes. $300 million hung in the balance, enough to bring his breakthroughs into hospitals across the country and beyond. This was the culmination of years of work, and the weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. He glanced over at the neatly packed suitcase waiting by the door. His assistant, Nia Grant, had been meticulous, ensuring every detail of the trip was perfect. From confirming the flight and securing a first-class seat to preparing briefing materials, Nia was the quiet backbone of his success. Malik's phone buzzed softly. A message from Nia boarding confirmed. Seat 1A on Flight 842 to LAX. Have a smooth flight. Malik. He smiled faintly, grateful for her support. Yet beneath the surface of preparation, a flicker of unease lingered. Over the years, Malik had learned that success did not always shield him from the realities of being a black man in spaces that were not designed for him. He had faced countless moments where assumptions about his worth and place were made before a word was spoken. He recalled a conversation with his father long ago. "People will try to put you in a box. Malik," his father had said, "but you don't have to stay there. Sometimes you have to break it open." Those words had always stayed with him, a call to resilience and dignity. The flight ahead should have been a routine part of his journey. Instead, it had become a crucible. Malik dressed carefully that morning, selecting a tailored navy blue suit and a crisp white shirt. He chose a silk tie in a subtle pattern, a balance of professionalism and personal style. As he adjusted his cufflinks, he thought about the image he wanted to project: calm, competent, and unshakable. Yet, as he left his apartment and stepped into the cool morning air, he felt the familiar tension that came with entering public spaces. Airports had always been places of paradox for him, gateways to opportunity, and yet stages for reminders of exclusion. His driver, Marcus, greeted him warmly at the curb, loading his luggage with practiced efficiency. As the car wound through Seattle streets toward the airport, Malik rehearsed his presentation silently, focusing on the data, the innovation, and the vision he was about to share. But even as he prepared, his mind returned to the silent questions that lingered beneath every success. Would he be taken seriously? Would his voice be heard over the noise of doubt and bias? Could he sit in the seat he had earned without being challenged? The airport was alive with activity when they arrived. Malik's smooth passage through check-in and security was routine, but he noticed the subtle shifts in glances and tone that seemed to follow him, the casual skepticism that asked more of him than it did of others. He moved toward the first-class lounge, where the quiet hum of conversation and clinking glasses offered a temporary refuge. Here. Malik took a moment to center himself, reviewing his notes once more and reflecting on how far he had come. Despite all the preparation, he could not shake the quiet knot of anxiety. The world he was about to step into was not just the boardroom or the conference hall. It was a world that still wrestled with invisible barriers and visible injustices. As boarding was announced, Malik rose, his resolve firm. This flight was the next step in a journey not only of miles, but of breaking through boundaries. He would carry not just his own hopes, but the hopes of many who looked to him as a symbol of possibility. And he was ready. The boarding announcement echoed gently through the terminal of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Malik Bennett felt the familiar swell of anticipation mixed with a quiet tension as the first-class passengers began to line up. He stood among them, a picture of calm, but inside his mind was alert, aware of every glance, every gesture around him. He had flown countless times before, yet today felt different. Today carried more than just the promise of business success. It carried the weight of every moment in his life where his presence was questioned, his worth doubted, or his dignity challenged. He was ready for this flight to be nothing but a smooth passage, a brief respite before the storm of meetings and negotiations. Yet, even as he approached the gate, he noticed subtle shifts in the air. The gate agents, efficient and polite, offered him the same professional greetings they gave to others, but Malik had learned to read between the lines. There was a flicker, a hesitation, as if they momentarily recalibrated their expectations when they saw him. Malik held his boarding pass, seat 1A, securely in his hand. He showed it to the gate agent without a word. The electronic scanner beeped green. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Bennett," the agent said with a practiced smile. Malik nodded and stepped onto the jet bridge. The familiar scent of jet fuel and polished cabins greeted him. The plane was alive with activity. Flight attendants moved swiftly, welcoming passengers, stowing luggage, and preparing for departure. The first-class cabin gleamed with muted luxury leather seats that cradled the body, soft lighting, and the subtle promise of comfort. Malik made his way to seat 1A, the window seat that represented not just comfort, but recognition of his hard-earned place. He smiled briefly to himself as he settled in, placing his briefcase in the overhead compartment and opening his tablet. He pulled up his presentation one last time, fingers lightly tracing slides filled with data, projections, and hope. Suddenly, a shadow fell across his screen. Malik looked up to find a tall, sharply dressed man standing over him. His face was firm, eyes narrowed slightly. "You're in my seat," the man said, voice firm and unyielding. Malik's gaze moved to the boarding pass in the man's hand. "Seat 1A. I'm afraid that's my seat," Malik replied evenly, holding up his own boarding pass. The man's jaw tightened. "No, it's mine. You must have been given the wrong seat assignment." Malik's heart remained steady, even as a flicker of disbelief crossed his mind. He had never been challenged like this before, not with such certainty and dismissal. The man's name tag read Ethan Caldwell, and there was a smug confidence in his posture that spoke volumes. Around them, the cabin grew quiet. Passengers shifted their attention to the confrontation unfolding in the aisle. Flight attendants nearby exchanged glances, their smiles faltering. Malik knew this was no simple misunderstanding. This was a test. His thoughts flickered to the countless times he had been made to feel less than, questioned, or excluded simply because of the color of his skin. Yet today, he was a CEO, a man who had built a company from the ground up. And still, he faced doubt. He spoke calmly, measured. "I boarded with a valid boarding pass. I ask that you or the crew verify the seat assignments before I am asked to move." Ethan scoffed lightly, folding his boarding pass. "You don't want to make a scene? Just move." Malik's eyes scanned the faces of nearby passengers. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with curiosity or judgment. The invisible pressure was immense, yet Malik held firm. Just then, Flight Attendant Olivia Clark approached. Her expression was professional, but cool as she addressed Malik. "Sir, there seems to be a problem. Please come with me and we'll sort this out." Malik hesitated, weighing his options. His pride urged him to stand his ground, but years of experience told him to choose his battles carefully. The murmurs grew louder. Conversations dipped into whispers. Some passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. Malik followed Olivia reluctantly, aware of the eyes on him. The warmth of the seat and the soft lighting of first class contrasted sharply with the growing tension around him. They reached the front of the cabin where the head flight attendant, Samuel Pierce, was waiting. His presence carried authority, but there was an unmistakable edge of impatience. "Mr. Bennett," Samuel said briskly, "there's been a seat assignment conflict. We'll have to find you another seat." Malik's chest tightened. "I would like to see the manifest. I want to be certain this is resolved correctly." Samuel's eyes flickered, and he exchanged a glance with Olivia. "That won't be possible until after the flight." Malik's internal voice urged him to stand firm. This was not just about a seat. It was about respect, about being seen and acknowledged. He felt a quiet strength welling inside him. "Then I will wait." Back in his original seat. Ethan Caldwell smirked triumphantly as Malik was led away. Malik settled into the premium economy cabin, a cramped middle seat sandwiched between strangers. The legroom was tight, the seat narrow. The difference was stark. He closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. The physical discomfort was minor compared to the emotional weight. This was a reminder that despite success and status, the barriers of bias remained real. Throughout the flight, Malik noticed the subtle but persistent difference in treatment. White passengers were offered warm smiles and attentive service. He received polite but distant interactions. When he requested access to his briefcase stored in first class, a flight attendant sighed and said, "We'll see what we can do." Malik's mind wandered back to his father's words about breaking boxes. He resolved that this moment was not a setback, but a challenge. His fight was no longer just for himself, but for everyone who faced similar invisible walls. Across the aisle sat Rachel Owens, a young flight operations assistant from the airline's corporate office. She observed the unfolding events with growing concern. Quietly, she began to record conversations, documenting the biased comments she overheard. Malik caught her glance once and nodded slightly a silent agreement. The flight continued with a tense undercurrent, each moment a small battle of dignity against assumption. Malik remained calm, inwardly preparing for the fight ahead. This was more than a seat dispute. It was a reckoning. Malik Bennett settled into the cramped middle seat in the premium economy cabin. The plush luxury of first class was a fading memory, replaced by the reality of limited legroom and two strangers squeezed beside him. A man by the window sprawled slightly, his arm encroaching on Malik's personal space, and on the other side, a young woman listened to music, headphones in place. Unaware of the tension enveloping the seat, Malik inhaled deeply, pushing aside the discomfort. His mind was already racing not with frustration, but with determination. He understood the stakes. This wasn't just about a seat on an airplane. It was a test of dignity, a confrontation with the invisible forces that shaped his experience as a black man, even at the height of his success. He recalled the initial moment when Ethan Caldwell had claimed Malik's rightful seat. The sharpness in Ethan's tone, the dismissive glances from the flight attendants, the cold efficiency with which Malik had been removed. Each detail replayed in his mind like a slow, painful echo. But it wasn't just the external conflict that weighed on Malik. Inside, a quieter struggle played out. He wrestled with his emotions: anger, humiliation, frustration, and the deep, steady voice of reason that urged him to remain composed. He had been trained to navigate these moments with grace. His entire career was built on perseverance, on proving himself twice as capable in a world predisposed to doubt him. But today, the personal and the professional collided in a way that was hard to reconcile. As he glanced around the cabin, Malik noticed the subtle reactions of other passengers. Some avoided his gaze, uncomfortable or unsure of how to respond. Others whispered among themselves, their curiosity palpable. A few offered sympathetic looks, small acts of silent solidarity that lifted him, if only slightly. Malik's thoughts drifted to his assistant, Nia Grant, who had meticulously prepared for this trip. She had believed in him when few others had. He wanted to honor her trust and the work of everyone who had helped build Vanguard Biotech. But how could he focus on business when his very presence here was contested? The flight attendant Olivia Clark passed by, her eyes briefly meeting Malik's. There was a flicker of something uncertainty, perhaps, but no apology. No recognition of the injustice. Malik's mind turned inward. He replayed his father's words. "Son, you have to be twice as good and half as loud." Those words had been his guide. But today he wondered if being twice as good was enough. If silence and composure would ever be enough to break down the walls that still surrounded him. He felt the sting of isolation. The invisible weight of expectations placed upon him not just as an individual, but as a symbol. Every black man in a room like this was carrying the hopes and fears of generations. The young woman beside him shifted in her seat, momentarily removing her headphones. Their eyes met briefly, a spark of unspoken understanding passing between them. Malik drew strength from that small connection. He opened his tablet and glanced at the presentation slides once more. The data was solid. The innovation was groundbreaking. This was why he had fought so hard. This was why he had endured. But the questions remained. Would the investors see beyond his skin? Would they listen to the man behind the suit and the title? Malik's thoughts were interrupted when Olivia approached again. Her tone was firm. "Sir, I need to remind you that recording on the flight is not allowed." Malik met her gaze steadily. "I am not making calls. I am documenting my experience." Olivia's expression hardened. "That is not permitted." Malik's voice was calm but resolute. "The Federal Aviation Administration allows electronic devices in airplane mode. I am within my rights." A brief silence followed. Passengers nearby watched the exchange with growing interest. Olivia nodded curtly and stepped away, clearly unsettled. Malik's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the knowledge that he was pushing boundaries not just for himself, but for everyone who had been silenced. Rachel Owens, the corporate flight operations assistant seated a few rows ahead, glanced back at Malik. Her eyes conveyed quiet support. She had already been documenting the crew's behavior and was determined to help Malik bring this issue to light. As the flight continued, Malik reflected on the systemic nature of what he was experiencing. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern, one that marginalized countless travelers based on race. He thought about the countless emails he had received over the years from other black executives and entrepreneurs who shared similar stories of discrimination and dismissal. Malik felt a surge of responsibility. This moment was bigger than discomfort or inconvenience. It was a call to action. His mind returned to the investor meeting awaiting him in Los Angeles. Success in business had always been about more than numbers for Malik. It was about opening doors, breaking barriers, and creating opportunities for those who came after. He silently vowed that his response to this injustice would be measured but unyielding. Later, as the cabin lights dimmed for the mid-flight rest period, Malik sat back and closed his eyes briefly. The physical discomfort of the cramped seat was almost a metaphor for the larger confinement. He felt the societal limits imposed by bias and prejudice. Yet within that confinement was a growing fire. Malik's resolve hardened. He was not here just to endure, but to change. Malik Bennett had learned over the years that the battle for dignity was often fought in silence and shadow. Yet, sometimes, the smallest acts of courage from unexpected places could turn the tide. On this flight, that courage came in the form of Rachel Owens. Rachel was a young woman in her late 20s, working as an assistant director in flight operations at Coastal Airlines. She had been with the company for 5 years, quietly observing and learning the ins and outs of airline procedures and customer service. Rachel had always been conscientious, committed to her job and to treating passengers with kindness. But over time, she had become painfully aware of patterns within the company, patterns of subtle bias and unequal treatment that often went unnoticed or unchallenged. As she watched Malik Bennett being asked to relinquish his rightful seat to a man who had no claim to it, Rachel's discomfort grew. She noticed the flicker of disbelief in Malik's eyes, the way his calm exterior masked the weight of humiliation. She heard the whispered remarks from the flight attendants, the dismissive tone when Malik tried to assert his rights. Rachel knew this was wrong, and she knew she couldn't stay silent. Her heart pounded as she discreetly pulled out her phone and began recording the conversations and interactions she witnessed. It was risky. She could face backlash from her supervisors or colleagues if anyone discovered what she was doing, but she felt compelled to stand for what was right. During a quiet moment, Rachel approached Malik's row. She leaned in slightly and whispered, "I see what's happening. I'm recording this too." Malik looked up, surprised but grateful. He nodded once, a small but powerful exchange of solidarity. Rachel's internal battle was just as intense as Malik's. She had worked alongside many dedicated colleagues, and she didn't want to believe the company she loved harbored such systemic issues. Yet, the truth was undeniable. She thought about her younger brother, who had recently married a black woman. Since their marriage, Rachel had witnessed firsthand the subtle differences in how her brother and sister-in-law were treated. It opened her eyes to a reality she hadn't fully understood before. Rachel had tried to raise concerns through the proper channels, but change was slow and often met with resistance. This flight, however, was different. She was determined to help Malik because she knew this was not just about one man or one seat. It was about accountability and justice. After their brief exchange, Rachel returned to her seat but continued to monitor the situation closely. She carefully documented every interaction between Malik and the crew, especially noting the contrast in treatment between Malik and the white passengers around him. Malik, meanwhile, found unexpected comfort in Rachel's quiet support. The gesture reminded him that he was not alone, even in a sea of indifferent faces. As the flight progressed, Malik decided to take a cautious step. He activated the voice recorder on his tablet, ensuring that every interaction was captured. He knew this evidence would be crucial in holding the airline accountable. Rachel noticed Malik's action and gave him an encouraging smile from across the aisle. It was a small beacon of hope in a tense atmosphere. The flight attendants seemed increasingly uneasy as the documentation grew. Olivia Clark approached Malik again, her tone sharper than before. "Sir, you need to turn off that device." Malik responded firmly but politely. "I am within my rights to document my experience." Rachel saw the exchange and stepped in subtly. She whispered to Malik, "If you need anything, I'm here." Their alliance was unspoken but unmistakable. Two people from different worlds united by a shared commitment to justice. As the plane cruised through the sky, Malik reflected on the power of allyship. He thought about how change often began with one person willing to speak up and support another. Rachel's courage reminded him that progress was possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Malik's internal resolve strengthened. He knew that after this flight, there would be a reckoning. The injustice he faced could no longer be hidden behind polite smiles and empty apologies. Meanwhile, Rachel contemplated the risk she was taking. She was stepping into unknown territory, challenging a system that had long resisted change, but she believed it was worth it. Her quiet act of defiance on this flight was a step toward a future where passengers like Malik would no longer be forced to prove their worth just to occupy a seat they had earned. As the sun began to set outside the cabin windows, casting a warm golden glow over the clouds, Malik and Rachel shared a brief, meaningful glance. It was a moment of connection, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. In that moment, the flight was no longer just a journey between cities. It was a journey toward justice. The cabin lights dimmed gently as the plane settled into the steady rhythm of cruising altitude. Outside the windows, endless sky stretched, clouds drifting below like islands of white. Malik Bennett leaned back in his narrow premium economy seat, the physical discomfort still a sharp contrast to the spacious luxury he had been promised and deserved. But his attention was not on the cramped space around him. His mind was focused, methodical. He powered on his tablet and activated the voice recorder. From that moment forward, every interaction with the flight crew, every murmur and glance, every subtle act of bias would be documented. Malik understood the power of evidence. He had built his company on data, facts, and verifiable truths. Now, he was gathering proof that his dignity had been compromised, that systemic prejudice had once again found him in its crosshairs. Around him, the flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. Yet the difference in their demeanor was palpable. When they approached white passengers, their smiles were warm, their gestures attentive. When they came to Malik, their expressions were cool, their movements clipped. Malik's phone buzzed softly with a message from Nia Grant, his assistant, checking in from the office. He quickly replied with a brief update. Careful not to reveal too much in case someone glanced at the screen, he noticed Rachel Owens watching from a few rows ahead, her discreet recording app active on her phone. Her presence was a quiet comfort. Malik felt less isolated knowing someone on the inside was willing to stand with him. As the beverage service began, Flight Attendant Olivia Clark approached Malik's row. Her eyes flickered briefly when she saw Malik recording, a shadow of nervousness crossing her face. "Sir, please turn off that device," she said firmly. Malik met her gaze calmly. "I am in airplane mode and only documenting my customer experience." Olivia hesitated. "That is against company policy." "I am within my rights," Malik replied evenly. "I am not making calls or interfering with the flight." A tense pause followed as Olivia weighed her options. Finally, she stepped away, her expression tight. Nearby passengers had begun to notice the tension. Some shifted uncomfortably, others exchanged whispered comments. Malik sensed the growing awareness. His quiet act of resistance was becoming a focal point. Later, as the cabin lights dimmed further for the mid-flight rest period, Malik's thoughts drifted inward. He replayed every moment of the boarding conflict, the dismissive glances, the condescending tone, the immediate assumption that he was mistaken or difficult. He remembered the countless stories he had heard over the years from other black travelers, stories of being profiled, questioned, or excluded. Stories that were often dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. But Malik knew better. These were not accidents or coincidences. They were symptoms of a deeper problem woven into the fabric of the system. His mind returned to his father's words about being twice as good. Malik realized that no matter how successful he became, no matter how many accolades or titles he earned, the burden of proving his worth would never fully disappear. But he also knew that silence was not the answer. His platform, his resources, and his voice were tools to challenge the status quo. Rachel's presence nearby was a reminder that allies could make a difference. Her willingness to risk her position to document injustice gave Malik hope. He vowed to use the evidence he was gathering to demand accountability not just for himself, but for everyone who had suffered quietly. As he prepared notes on his tablet, Malik's thoughts shifted to strategy. He would file formal complaints, engage legal counsel, and leverage media attention if necessary. The goal was not confrontation for its own sake, but systemic change. The flight attendants continued their rounds, serving white passengers with smiles and attentiveness. Malik noticed how different his requests were met with sighs, delays, and dismissive gestures. The stark contrast fueled his resolve. He refused to be invisible or dismissed. Rachel caught his eye again and gave him a subtle nod. Malik returned the gesture with a small smile, gratitude deep in his gaze. Hours into the flight, Malik recorded a quiet conversation overheard between two flight attendants. They laughed about how some passengers always think they belong in first class, their words laced with racial undertones. The sting of those words burned deeply. It was the kind of casual racism that was often invisible to outsiders, but devastating to those who endured it daily. Malik felt a surge of emotion, frustration, sadness, but also determination. He was not a symbol of exception, but a representative of many whose experiences had long been ignored. He carefully documented the conversation, knowing it would be a powerful piece of evidence. As the plane began its descent toward Los Angeles, Malik reviewed the recordings and notes he had collected. The weight of the journey pressed on him, but he felt prepared. This was no longer a personal humiliation, but a moment to expose systemic failure. He thought about the upcoming meeting with the airline's corporate officials and the company board. The confrontation would be difficult, but necessary. Malik glanced out the window at the sprawling city below, lights twinkling as dust settled. The journey that had begun with a disputed seat had become a catalyst for accountability. His fight was far from over, but for the first time in hours, Malik felt a quiet surge of hope. The cabin lights flickered softly as the plane began its steady descent into Los Angeles International Airport. Outside, the sprawling cityscape emerged beneath a hazy twilight sky. Malik Bennett sat quietly in his cramped seat, fingers loosely gripping his tablet. The past few hours had been an emotional whirlwind, a collision between professionalism and raw, unfiltered reality. He reflected on the countless moments during the flight where dignity had been tested, the way the flight attendants had skirted around him, the dismissive tone, the cold glances, all pieces of a puzzle he knew too well. Malik felt the weight of generations pressing down on his shoulders, yet within that pressure was a growing fire. Rachel Owens had been a quiet beacon throughout the flight, her discreet support a reminder that allyship could exist even in unexpected places. The courage she displayed by recording the biased comments of the crew gave Malik the strength to stay composed. Together, they were documenting a narrative that demanded to be told. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, signaling the approach to the gate, Malik noticed a shift in the cabin atmosphere. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. Olivia Clark avoided eye contact as she passed by his row. Malik knew that the evidence he and Rachel had collected was already beginning to unravel the carefully constructed facade. Minutes later, as the plane slowed to a taxi, an announcement came over the intercom, requesting that passengers remain seated for a special procedure before deplaning. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the cabin. Regular flyers exchanged puzzled looks. This was not standard protocol. Malik sat upright, sensing that something significant was unfolding. From the cockpit emerged Captain James Harper, his expression grave. He moved toward the first-class cabin, followed closely by two men in dark suits, security personnel whose presence immediately commanded attention. Passengers turned toward the front, whispers growing louder. The security officers moved directly to seat 1B, where Ethan Caldwell was seated, the man who had claimed Malik's rightful seat. The contrast between Malik's earlier displacement and the unfolding scene was stark. "Sir, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us," one of the officers said firmly to Ethan. Ethan's face flushed with disbelief and anger. "What is this about? I haven't done anything wrong. Please lower your voice and cooperate," the officer replied calmly. Malik watched quietly, still recording. The cabin was silent now, every eye fixed on the drama. Ethan protested loudly, demanding explanations, but the officers remained composed. Captain Harper approached, his face pale but resolute. "Mr. Caldwell, your cooperation is required. This matter will be addressed off the aircraft." The scene was surreal. The man who had arrogantly claimed a seat that was not his was now being escorted away in handcuffs, his protests echoing down the aisle. Malik felt a quiet vindication, but also a profound sadness. This was not just about one man or one flight. It was about the systemic biases that allowed such behavior to go unchecked for far too long. Rachel appeared at Malik's side, her expression sober. "I've already sent the recordings and reports to the corporate office," she whispered. "They're launching an internal investigation." Malik nodded, his mind racing. This was the moment he had been preparing for the reckoning. The plane finally came to a stop at the gate. Passengers began to gather their belongings, but the unusual tension lingered. Crew members moved with subdued urgency, no longer the polished faces of hospitality, but participants in a crisis. As Malik disembarked, he was greeted by Alicia Morgan, the vice president of operations for Coastal Airlines. Her demeanor was professional, but tinged with genuine concern. "Mr. Bennett, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced," she said quietly. "This incident is being treated with the utmost seriousness." Malik studied her face. He had heard apologies before, often empty and performative. But something about Alicia's presence suggested this time might be different. "I appreciate that," Malik replied, "but I am here for accountability, not just apologies." Alicia nodded. "We're committed to change. We've already begun implementing new training and oversight protocols." Malik knew the road ahead would be long and challenging. Systemic issues did not unravel overnight. But this moment, the public acknowledgement, the security officer's intervention, was a breakthrough. Outside the terminal, Malik's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant and legal team. The social media posts detailing the incident were going viral, sparking nationwide conversations about race, privilege, and justice in air travel. As Malik walked through the terminal, reporters approached, eager for comment. He spoke with measured calm, his voice carrying the weight of experience and hope. "This is not just about me," he said. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to face what I face today. It's about systemic change, accountability, and dignity for every traveler." Behind the scenes, Coastal Airlines headquarters buzzed with tension. The airline's CEO, Richard Langston, was briefed on the unfolding crisis. His initial response was defensive, focused on damage control, but as the video evidence and testimonies mounted, even he realized the gravity of the situation. Board members convened an emergency meeting to discuss the airline's response. Investor confidence wavered, and the company's stock began to dip amid mounting public pressure. Meanwhile, Malik prepared for what was to come, a meeting with the airline's leadership, a chance to demand real reform. He understood that this confrontation was not just personal. It was a pivotal moment for corporate America's reckoning with racial bias. As the city lights of Los Angeles glittered in the night, Malik stood at a crossroads. The humiliation of the flight was behind him, replaced by a new purpose. He was ready to transform pain into progress. The lobby of Coastal Airlines headquarters was alive with an uneasy energy. Employees moved briskly through the glass doors, faces tight with concern or curiosity. News of the incident aboard Flight 842 had spread rapidly, igniting discussions not only within the company but across the industry and social media platforms. Malik Bennett arrived, fresh from the airport, his sharp suit still carrying the subtle creases from the cramped economy seat. But there was no sign of fatigue on his face, only a quiet determination. This meeting was more than a formality. It was an opportunity to demand change. Jessica Taylor, a senior corporate officer and longtime ally of Malik's cause, greeted him with a warm but serious expression. "Mr. Bennett, we're ready for you in the boardroom. The executive team and board members have assembled." Malik nodded and followed Jessica through the sleek hallways. The weight of the moment pressed upon him, but he carried it with calm strength. The boardroom was a cavernous space dominated by a massive oak table surrounded by leather chairs. Seated were Coastal's top executives, including CEO Richard Langston, the Vice President Alicia Morgan, and the chairwoman of the board. Eleanor Richardson, a formidable woman whose sharp eyes seemed to weigh every word before it was spoken. Richard Langston rose as Malik entered, extending a hand. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming. We deeply regret what happened on your flight." Malik shook his hand firmly, but did not offer a smile. "I'm here to ensure that regret translates into action." Eleanor Richardson cleared her throat and gestured for the meeting to begin. "Mr. Langston has prepared a response plan we believe addresses the concerns raised. Richard flipped through a binder, then began. We propose mandatory sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff, a review and overhaul of complaint procedures, immediate suspension of the crew involved, and a public apology. Malik listened attentively. These were familiar promises, ones he had heard in countless similar situations. But this time, he was prepared with more than words. He placed a folder on the table and opened it, revealing a detailed report. This is my proposal for comprehensive reform, he said, his voice steady. It includes an independent third-party audit of passenger complaints over the last 5 years, focusing on race and ethnicity. It calls for structural changes to complaint resolution to prevent crew members from acting as judge and jury in disputes. And most importantly, it demands the establishment of an independent diversity council with real authority. The room grew silent. Malik continued. Finally, I propose the creation of the Air Travel Equality Initiative, a foundation funded by a $50 million endowment from coastal airlines, dedicated to combating discrimination across the industry. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Langston, who looked visibly unsettled. That is a significant financial commitment, Langston said cautiously. It could impact our shareholder returns. Malik's eyes met his. Mr. Langston, what happened on Flight 842 has already cost coastal airlines over $1 billion in market value. Ignoring systemic problems is far more costly. Jessica Taylor leaned forward. The evidence we've compiled shows this is not an isolated incident. It is systemic. Without decisive action, this will happen again. A tense discussion unfolded as board members debated the proposals. Some voiced concerns about cost and logistics. Others recognized the moral imperative and business necessity. Malik observed quietly, aware that this was a battle of old guard resistance versus the pressing demand for real change. After a long pause, Eleanor stood. The board has voted. We will adopt Mr. Bennett's proposal in full. The room erupted in murmurs. Langston sat back, defeated. Malik felt a mixture of relief and resolve. This was only the beginning. Eleanor addressed him directly. Mr. Bennett, we would like to invite you to serve as an advisor on the Diversity Council. Malik considered the offer carefully. Thank you. Ms. Richardson, I prefer to remain an independent advocate, but would be willing to join the advisory council if it remains truly independent. She nodded in understanding. We will respect that. As the meeting concluded, Malik felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly. This was more than a victory. It was a mandate for ongoing accountability. Later that evening, Malik sat alone in his hotel room, reflecting on the day. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from supporters, journalists, and other executives who had witnessed the unfolding drama. His mind turned to the many passengers who had endured similar injustices without the platform or resources to fight back. This fight was for them. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready. In the quiet moments, Malik thought of his father's words once more. This time, the meaning was deeper. Being twice as good was not just about individual success, but about breaking down barriers so others would not have to bear the same burden. The morning sunlight filtered through the large windows of the Coastal Airlines headquarters conference room as Malik Bennett prepared to address a crowd of reporters, activists, airline executives, and civil rights leaders. The event was hastily arranged, but symbolically powerful. A press conference announcing the launch of the Air Travel Equality Initiative and the sweeping reforms coastal airlines had agreed to implement. Malik stood at the podium, the weight of recent events and the hopes of many resting heavily on his shoulders. His voice was calm, but carried the undeniable force of someone who had faced injustice and refused to be silenced. "What happened to me on Flight 842 is not unique," Malik began. "It is a reflection of a system that has long tolerated bias and discrimination, often invisible to those who do not experience it, but painfully clear to those who do. Today, we take a stand not just for me, but for every traveler who has faced indignity because of the color of their skin." Behind him stood Jessica Taylor, now director of the newly formed Office of Passenger Advocacy and Corporate Accountability. Her presence added credibility and hope to the message. She had risked much by speaking out and stood as a testament to the power of allyship. The conference room was packed with media representatives eager for Malik's words. Cameras flashed as he outlined the reforms, mandatory bias, and sensitivity training for all staff, structural changes to complaint resolution, an independent diversity council, and the $50 million foundation dedicated to combating discrimination in air travel. "This is not just about coastal airlines," Malik emphasized. "It is about changing an industry and a culture. We want every passenger to board a plane with dignity, respect, and confidence." Questions from journalists came quickly. Malik answered with measured honesty, refusing to let the conversation be deflected by corporate platitudes. He spoke of the pain of exclusion and the power of accountability. Outside, social media erupted. Clips of Malik's speech spread rapidly. Hashtags like the Fly with Dignity and our Travel Equality trended nationally. Stories of discrimination shared by everyday travelers poured in, creating a wave of awareness and solidarity. Meanwhile, within coastal airlines, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The once rigid culture of denial was replaced by an urgent drive for transparency and reform. Jessica worked tirelessly to implement new policies and to foster a culture where passengers felt heard and valued. The crew members involved in the Flight 842 incident faced disciplinary action, with some terminated and others enrolled in extensive training programs. The airline publicly acknowledged its failures and committed to continuous improvement. Malik's phone was flooded with messages of support from fellow CEOs, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens. The movement he had sparked was growing, fueled by the undeniable truth of his experience. Yet, beneath the surface, Malik wrestled with complex emotions. The humiliation he had endured lingered, a painful reminder of how far society still had to go. But more than that, he felt a deep responsibility not just to lead the change, but to ensure it was meaningful and lasting. One evening, after a long day of meetings and interviews, Malik sat alone on his hotel balcony overlooking the city lights. The silence allowed space for reflection. He thought about his journey from a boy in Chicago's South Side to a CEO facing a powerful industry. The struggle had been long and arduous, filled with moments of doubt and isolation. But it had also been a testament to resilience, to the power of using one's voice for justice. His phone buzzed again, a message from a young entrepreneur who had watched Malik's speech and was inspired to speak out about their own experiences. Malik smiled, sensing the ripple effect of his stand. The true measure of progress, he knew, would not be found in boardrooms or headlines, but in the everyday lives of passengers who could now fly without fear or humiliation. The sun rose over Los Angeles, casting a warm glow across the city as Malik Bennett arrived at the Coastal Airlines headquarters for what promised to be one of the most pivotal meetings of his life. Today was the meeting with Richard Langston, the former CEO whose leadership had been marked by a culture of denial and dismissal, and now a man seeking to reckon with the consequences of his actions. Malik's mind was a complex tapestry of thoughts. The flight, the boarding conflict, the public reckoning. It all felt like a lifetime ago, and yet had unfolded in just weeks. He was no stranger to confrontation, but today was different. This was not just about business. It was about accountability, healing, and transformation. As he entered the sleek conference room, Malik noticed Langston already seated, his posture tense, eyes reflecting a mixture of regret and defiance. Around them sat members of the new Diversity Council, airline executives, and legal advisors. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Malik began, his voice steady but layered with emotion. "Mr. Langston, this company was built on trust, the trust of millions of passengers who expect dignity and respect when they fly. What happened on Flight 842 was a breach of that trust." Langston nodded slowly. "I understand that now. I see where I failed as a leader. I want to apologize, not just to you, but to all those who have been hurt by our failures." Malik regarded him carefully. Apologies are a start, but they are not enough. True leadership demands change, real, measurable change. The discussion turned to the policies Malik had proposed: independent audits, restructuring complaint resolution, empowering the Diversity Council with real authority, and ensuring transparency. Langston asked difficult questions, some defensive, others sincere. Malik saw in him a reflection of the broader challenge, the tension between preserving business interests and pursuing justice. He acknowledged this tension, but remained firm. If Coastal Airlines wants to regain trust, it must put people above profits. The conversation was long and at times contentious, but by the end, there was consensus. Langston agreed to step down, making way for new leadership committed to the reforms Malik championed. As the meeting adjourned, Malik felt a profound sense of closure mingled with responsibility. This was not the end, but a critical milestone in a much longer journey. Later that day, Malik met privately with members of the Diversity Council, including Jessica Taylor, whose dedication and courage had been instrumental in this movement. They discussed strategies to implement reforms, engage employees at all levels, and create a culture where respect was non-negotiable. Malik shared his vision for the Air Travel Equality Initiative, emphasizing collaboration with other airlines, government agencies, and civil rights organizations. The goal was to create a sustainable model that would ripple across the industry. As evening settled over the city, Malik stood on his hotel balcony, reflecting on the day. The journey had been painful, but necessary. He thought about the passengers who would benefit from the changes they were building, travelers no longer burdened by fear or invisibility. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "So proud of you. Malik, Dad would be too." Tears filled his eyes. His father's lessons had been the foundation of his life, not just to succeed, but to uplift others. Malik knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but he was ready. For the first time in a long time, he felt that real change was within reach. The months following the public outcry and boardroom battles had transformed Coastal Airlines in ways few had anticipated. Malik Bennett found himself at the forefront of a movement not just for corporate change, but for a fundamental shift in how people were seen and treated in the skies. One crisp morning in San Francisco, Malik stood before a packed conference hall at the inaugural Air Travel Equality Initiative Summit. The banner above read boldly, "Dignity in Flight, a new era for air travel." Attendees included airline executives, civil rights advocates, government regulators, and countless travelers whose voices had been amplified by Malik's stand. As Malik began his keynote address, he felt the weight of the journey, the personal battles, the legal fights, the quiet moments of doubt. Yet, in that room filled with hopeful faces, he found renewed purpose. When I boarded that flight months ago, Malik said, his voice steady and clear, I never imagined that a disputed seat would ignite a movement for justice. This is about more than one flight, one airline, or even one industry. It's about ensuring dignity and respect for every person, regardless of race, background, or status. Jessica Taylor stood nearby, now leading a dedicated team within Coastal Airlines tasked with ensuring accountability and transparency. Her journey from a hesitant corporate employee to a courageous advocate was a beacon of hope. Together, Malik and Jessica had helped launch new reporting systems for discrimination, extensive training programs emphasizing empathy and cultural awareness, and partnerships with community organizations to foster inclusivity. As the conference progressed, Malik met travelers who shared stories of subtle biases and outright discrimination stories that had long gone unheard. Their courage in speaking out fueled Malik's resolve. Later, in a quieter moment, Malik met with Richard Langston, the former CEO who had resigned in the wake of the scandal. Langston had committed himself to personal growth and understanding, attending anti-bias workshops and publicly supporting the reforms. I underestimated the depth of this problem, as Langston admitted during their conversation. You showed us what true leadership looks like, standing up not just for yourself, but for others. Malik nodded. Change is never easy, but it is necessary. In the months that followed, Coastal Airlines stock rebounded, buoyed by a renewed reputation and commitment to social responsibility. More importantly, passengers reported a tangible difference, a sense of being valued and respected. Malik's own company, Vanguard Biotech, flourished alongside his advocacy. The Japanese investors, impressed by Malik's integrity and leadership, increased their support, allowing Vanguard's groundbreaking medical technology to reach new heights. Yet amidst the victories, Malik remained grounded. He understood that systemic change was ongoing and fragile. One evening, Malik stood on a rooftop overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, the city lights shimmering below. Jessica joined him, both reflecting on the journey. Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this? Jessica asked softly. Malik smiled, the weight of exhaustion and hope mingling in his expression. Never. But that's how change happens, one moment, one stand at a time. As the sun set over the bay, Malik felt a quiet peace. The fight for dignity was far from over, but the path ahead was clearer. Together, they had transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for justice, creating space for those who would come next to fly freely, proudly, and without fear. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco was buzzing with anticipation. Malik Bennett stood behind the podium once again, addressing a diverse crowd of airline executives, civil rights leaders, government officials, and community advocates. The banner behind him read, Air Travel Equality Initiative Conference, a testament to how far the movement had come since that fateful flight months ago. Malik took a deep breath and began, his voice calm but resolute. When I boarded Flight 842 last year, I was focused on a business meeting that I believed would define the future of my company. I never imagined that a dispute over a seat would redefine an entire industry's approach to dignity, respect, and equality. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle in the room. The audience was silent, rapt. This transformation is not about me. It's about recognizing that the humiliation I experienced is one shared by countless travelers who face discrimination and silence every day. It is about the systemic change we must build to ensure that dignity is not a privilege reserved for some, but a right afforded to all. Malik spoke of the sweeping reforms Coastal Airlines had implemented, the independent audits, the comprehensive sensitivity training, and the establishment of an empowered diversity council. He highlighted the impact of the Air Travel Equality Initiative, funded initially by Coastal, but now supported by 6 major airlines, creating a unified front against bias in air travel. As Malik continued, he acknowledged the many individuals whose courage had fueled this movement, including Jessica Taylor, who had risen to lead Coastal's passenger advocacy efforts. Her commitment had become a beacon for corporate accountability and change. He told stories of passengers who now flew without fear, who felt seen and respected for the first time. Stories that reminded everyone present that policy changes on paper meant nothing without lived experiences transformed. Following Malik's keynote, the conference transitioned into breakout sessions, panels, and workshops aimed at fostering ongoing dialogue and collaboration. Malik moved through the crowd, engaging with attendees, sharing insights, and inspiring others to carry the torch forward. Later that evening, Malik found a quiet moment on the hotel balcony overlooking the sparkling San Francisco Bay. The Golden Gate Bridge loomed majestically in the distance, a symbol of connection and resilience. Jessica joined him, and together they reflected on the journey from that humiliating day on Flight 842 to this moment of profound hope. "Did you ever imagine it would lead here?" Jessica asked softly. Malik shook his head, a smile touching his lips. "Never. But change often begins in the most unexpected ways. One act of courage can ripple outward, touching lives we may never know." Jessica nodded. "It's not just about policy or procedure. It's about people. Real lives." Malik's thoughts drifted to his father's enduring lesson that being twice as good was not just about personal achievement, but about paving the way for those who come next. He thought about the young entrepreneur who had reached out after Malik's speech, about the countless others empowered to speak out because they knew someone was listening. In that quiet moment, Malik understood the true legacy of his stand. It was not the headlines or the reforms, but the space created space for dignity, for justice, for hope. The path ahead would still be challenging. Discrimination would not vanish overnight. But the conversation had changed. The consequences for injustice were real. Malik turned to Jessica with quiet determination. "We have to keep going. For every passenger, every traveler who deserves to fly with dignity." As the night deepened and the city lights twinkled below, Malik felt a profound peace. His journey from the humiliating cramped seat to the stage of transformation had become a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of standing up. This was not just his victory. It was a victory for all who refused to accept anything less than equality. Malik Bennett's story is more than a fight for a seat on an airplane. It's a powerful reminder that dignity and respect are rights, not privileges. His courage to stand firm in the face of discrimination exposes the painful reality many face but few speak about. It teaches us that injustice, when exposed, can become the spark for lasting change, but only if we refuse to stay silent. This journey invites us all to reflect on the everyday biases we may overlook and challenges us to be allies like Rachel and Jessica, who act when they witness injustice. Let Malik's experience remind us that fighting discrimination isn't just about one person's pain. It's about creating a world where everyone can be seen and valued equally. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel. Your voice matters, and together we can continue to amplify stories that inspire change and justice. Stay tuned for more real, heartfelt stories that challenge us to be better for ourselves and for future generations.